what outfit is running it, but there are still trains running there. So here's a view of the Catskills station, or a nice early view. And then this is a real photo postcard view of Sharon Springs Depot. And then a regular printed color postcard of the same building. On that line, the last passengers were 1933, but they kept going with freight until 1956. And then finally closed that branch line, but as I say, the main line is still operational today.
They didn't close it early enough that they didn't build the bridge over the highway, though.
The bridge, there's this weird bridge, Cherry Valley, that you look at and say, what the heck is this?
Never had a track on it.
They built it just when they, and then they closed before they even had the train go over it. This would be an old image of the Cherry Valley station. I think it's now the fire department building or something like that in Cherry Valley. So again, just a little short railroad history, not too far from here. And I'm going to end with what's my favorite railroad, the Delaware and Eastern. Everyone else calls it by its later name, the Delaware and Northern, but initially it was the Delaware and Eastern. It ran from 1905 to 1942. And this is going to be where I answer your question. The big vision on this, there was a guy named Searing who was a Wall Street financier. His idea was to create a railroad that would be a shortcut from the coal fields in Pennsylvania near Scranton to Albany and then to New England. At that point, people either had to use the Erie or the O&W and then connect to the D and H at Binghamton. He sort of wanted to make a diagonal that went right through the middle of all that, which would be less mileage, i.e. lower costs for freight, and he thought he could, succeed with that. So, but they first built just from East Branch, where it connected with the O&W, to Arkville, where it connected with the Ulster and Delaware. On paper, they had plans to extend all the way into Pennsylvania in one direction and all the way to Schenectady in the other direction. So they opened in 1905. And this is the first train into Arena, November 1905. And again, for all of these small towns, and it was the same here in Gilboa. When the train finally got here, it opened, that town to the outside world. You could get freight and you could go places. And you could ship out freight. So it was a big deal, big celebration anytime the train first came to town. This would be the depot in Margaretville. That would have been the second stop right after, or the next stop right after you left Arkville. And at the other end, the O&W and the Delaware and Eastern met at East Branch. This is just one piece of their engineering. They had this really great trestle near Andes. There was a small branch line that went from near Shavertown to Andes. That didn't last as long. That only was like 1906 to 1923, I think. And this is the station in Andes, which is still there. The town owns it. The town of Andes recently had it refurbished. It really looks pretty sharp. They hold some community events there. And there's a rail trail. If you like rail trails, there's a nice rail trail that you could actually walk some of the Delaware and Eastern trackage. Now we get to your question. So you had the Middleburg and Schoharie getting as far as Middleburg. You've got the Ulster and Delaware getting as far as Grand Gorge. The Delaware and Eastern thought, we can fill in that gap as part of their project to bring that coal from Pennsylvania to Schenectady cheaper. So this is a postcard of the engineering crew of the Delaware and Eastern, and this is by a photographer in Breakabeen. So this is telling you where they were working. About 1908, they started seriously working on trying to make that extension. And the first steps would have been to go from Grand Gorge, and again, because of the topography, they didn't want to go over the mountain where the way Route 30 goes today. So they decided, even though it was miles out of the way, it was better for railroad business to go down to Prattsville and then up the Schoharie Valley to Gilboa and that way. rather than going over that, the mountain, which is shorter but steeper. So they had this engineering crew, and they did a lot of preparatory work. The folks at the Ulster and Delaware Railroad Historical Society have done a lot of research on this. They have found remnants of some construction that was actually done. If you read newspaper accounts, and I'm sure your Gilboa Monitor would have a lot about this, in 1909 was when they were trying to build this. Unfortunately, they were doing it in the winter. They had incredible weather problems, they had mud issues, but more damaging than that, they had financial problems. Apparently, this guy Searing stiffed some people who were selling bonds for him. He didn't pay them their commissions or whatever, and it ended up in the courts. The whole thing exploded, and they stopped work on this project, and within a couple of years, it was no longer the Delaware and Eastern, it had become the Delaware and Northern. Now, the postcard you're mentioning, you're right, that's like an early version of Photoshop. There was a postcard showing a train in Breakabeen. There was never a train in Breakabeen.
You've seen the postcard.
I've seen the postcard. I wish I still had it, actually. Somebody else has it now, but it's an incredible card when you realize that, oh, they didn't have Photoshop then. How did they do this? One of the things, after it became the Delaware and Northern, there wasn't that much traffic, either freight or passengers, and it costs a heck of a lot of money to run a steam engine and passenger cars and freight cars. A lot of the time they found they could make do with this thing. It's called a brill car. It's a gasoline-powered one car. It carried passengers, it carried freight, I believe it even carried the mail.
Chickens and whatever else it carried.
It would carry whatever needed to be carried, but you needed fewer people, and it cost a lot less to run because it was just this one car powered by gasoline rather than a steam engine and everything else that it was dragging. So that's one of the things that helped the Delaware and Northern survive as long as it did. There were actually hopes that after the Ashokan Reservoir and the Gilboa Reservoir were created, New York City still needed more water. And it was pretty sure where they were going to go next, it was going to be the East Branch of the Delaware River, right where the Papacton Reservoir is today. Unfortunately, World War II intervened, so that was delayed a bit. Because this railroad, the Delaware and Northern, was hoping that they would, cash in on that by bringing the supplies for construction of the dam and all that, and give them another lease on life. But that didn't happen. They couldn't hold on once the reservoir got delayed, so they ended up closing in 1942. This would be the station in Margaretville after it had closed. If you know Margaretville at all, the bridge you see on the left is the bridge, or the precursor to the bridge you take now to the supermarket. So, and right in the middle in the back is Route 28 before it was expanded. So this sits basically right in the middle of Route 28 today. This is another building that's still there. This is in Corbett. If you're on Route 30 below Downsville, there's an incredible chimney from one of the old acid factories. Here you can see the tracks and this building looking kind of run down. Well, I can tell you, I drove through there last week. The tracks are gone. The building is still there and is still looking run down. So I just want to say thanks to Dominic, who helped with technical issues, Carolyn, who taught me PowerPoint to begin with, a friend of mine, John LeVar, has given me a lot of information and images on railroad. Most of you know John Hamm and all the work he's done on railroads. He's got a lot of great railroad books. And Rick Brooks, who did a lot of the work on Fenwick. I was able to go to several talks he gave and learned a lot from him. He led that hike a few years ago, so he's terrific to learn from. And I just want to mention three people who taught me so much about local history, and that would be Justine Hummel, who was the founder of the Mountaintop Historical Society, Lonnie Gale and Shandaken and Tim Mallory, and I just want to give them a nod in their memory. Any questions? That's sort of about what I had to say. I have postcards and other items here to look at?
According to Rich Lewis, who has passed away, but he was our historian, around the corner here, at a place they call the Patty Hole, there was originally an attempt to bring a railroad across there. Do you know anything about
Yeah,
that?
that's the one I was talking about, where they were trying to build from
Grand Gorge to
Grand Gorge down to Prattsville, and then to come up through here, eventually to get to Middleburg. But
What stopped that one?
that was the one where they, between the weather and the bad finances.
Oh.
That was 1909. And in all honesty, one of the things that stopped it, Jay Gould or his successors won that one. The big guys didn't like this little railroad trying to steal some of their thunder.
Cutting across the middle.
Some of their business cutting right in the middle. So the big guys did everything they could in the courts to stop that as well.
When the railroad came to Gilboa, it went up by the Patty Hole, and I've got the survey for the railroad from the Patty Hole to Durham. Went right through the back part of Collinsville, and then it went, I don't know if anybody knows where, what's the name of that place? I don't know. Anyhow, it's state land now, but it went behind all the Gilboa, or the Collinsville houses, and it went up on, by a big mountain that dropped down into Durham. And I've got the survey of just where it was going. And then they had that train wreck down, up this side of Carroll.
Yeah, the Catskills Harry, when they lost their locomotive into the river. They already had a train going up through the Livingstonville that way, or almost up there, and this was supposed to hook onto that train from, must be Hudson up through. And I got the survey, and it never got built, but it's really interesting right where it was going, and you can just see it by looking at the Collinsville map. It goes right across the northern part of Collinsville.
Is that the Delaware northern way to get to?
I'm not sure, that may be the earlier one. Now that you're saying where it went, I'm not sure. Because the original plans back in the 1840s were to go from Catskill all the way up. So it could have been earlier then.
Yeah, from Cooksburg.
There's a bridge, I've got a picture of it, it was taken down someplace in the 1940s, 50s, maybe 60. That was a bridge for the railroad, but never had tracks coming out.
Yeah, that's the one in the back road, Grand Gorge to Prattsville.
Right.
That's where the bridge is. It was coming Grand Gorge, and then down to, what's the name of that road? Just before you get to Prattsville, there was a big
Johnson Hollow?
junction, Johnson Hollow, yeah. And then it was to come to Gilboa.
Yeah, that was
So
the
that's
one,
a
that was this one, that was the Delaware and Eastern.
Right.
Where they were engineering that the U&D would get them as far as Grand Gorge. They were then going to branch off and go in the other direction to Prattsville, and then back through the valley all the way to
And there
Middleburg.
was a picture, this was a 2008 newsletter, but there was a map of the K for turning the train around in Prattsville.
Yeah, that's those folks in the Ulster Delaware Historical Society did a lot of that work. What I want everybody to understand is a lot of the railroad business, if you picture the year 2000 and all the dot-com bubbles, railroads were the dot-coms of
The
the
1840s.
much of the 19th century. You'd have so many lines that were proposed, some would start a little work, some never got beyond the paper. There are all kinds of, old stock certificates for railroads that never existed. It was the rare one that stayed itself and kept going. The Delaware and Hudson was pretty strong, and in fact, at one point, there was talk of the Delaware and Hudson merging with two other railroads that were not as financially well off, and they just said, no, there's nothing in this for us.
In 1968, they were trying to make, when they made Conrail, well, what turned into Conrail, the Penn Central weavings, they tried to be, in the spirit of competition, the Delaware and Hudson was supposed to pick up the Erie and the Lehigh Valley. And then in the end, they wound up just giving them some of the locomotives and rolling stock to equalize it all. And the Delaware and Hudson said, no, we'll stay ourselves.
I think even before that, there was talk of the Delaware and Hudson absorbing the Erie and the Lackawanna. And at that point, the Delaware and Hudson folks said, no, we don't want any of that. Erie and Lackawanna then merged, and they didn't do that well. And the Delaware and Hudson
So
kept
Phoebe
on
Snow
going.
was a happy girl.
Oh, John, I was going through some history base that I have, and I found this paper from 1983.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I hadn't seen that one.
This would be Delaware County mostly. And in the middle section is my husband's Uncle Frank Sprague, the Red Heifer Railroad. Uncle Frank was hit by a train which smashed the side of his face while he was working there. But this is quite interesting. And it also has the Delaware and Hudson. It has Jay Gould, who you were talking about. The favorite subject of the D&H artists. Roxbury's Gould, History's Egna. Roxbury Jay Gould, and shows his house. And I just thought I'd bring it in and show it to you. I had told Val about it, and I am going to get a hold of Nancy Gallup to see if they would like this this paper. They show, I'm going to put my glasses on here. See, well, I have contacts, but I can't see close up. Yeah, the Ulster lifeline of the Catskill Mountains, which is the Ulster and Delaware train pulls up to the Bloomville station.
Mm-hmm.
And they show a whole bunch here. BRT has only on a heritage. So if anybody'd like to look at it, I'll leave it there for now. And you're welcome to look at it, but I thought it was interesting, and I remember.
Oh,
And Uncle Frank in 1983 was 95 years old, and he rode that railroad. They took him for a ride, and he was thrilled. He and his wife were married for 75 years. They lived in Robinson Terrace, and they actually brought their bed from their bedroom so they could sleep together. Because they would never slept alone, alone. And they lived next to Eddie Weedman and Maureen Weedman's restaurant. The house just above there. I think it's a blue color now, but that's where they lived. Yeah. And he worked on it. It was called the Red Heifer Railroad. So there's a story about him, and I'll just put it over there if anybody'd like to look at it.
Thank you, Dottie.
Thank you.
And
I forgot to mention one thing, and actually, let's see if I can get that. This is the Red Heifer. This was the nickname for that Brill car that saved them so much money. So the Delaware Northern ended in 1942 when they just couldn't hold on any longer, even though they knew there'd be money to be made with the reservoir construction, but they couldn't hold on. I gave a talk just on the Delaware and Eastern Delaware and Northern several times. One of them was in Margaretville for the Historical Society there. I had a gentleman say, yeah, I rode that last train. So that was pretty cool. As a young man, he was on that last train of the railroad I was talking about 70 some odd years later.
wow.
So, and that's the fun thing in history, that you meet people like that and find things like that.
That's the truth.
I actually rode on that Beacon trolley
Uh-huh.
when I was a little girl.
Oh, cool.
I was on it.
We did it, and we went up on the top, my mom brought a picnic basket, we ate out on the grounds, I think. I was little, but I do remember that, going there.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, because that one did last later. That went into the 70s.
Well, I witnessed this.
Well, thank you very much, John, and I hope you'll come up and take a look at his postcard.
HeadwatersHistoryDays.org. Come down to Delaware County and check us out.
In May, the first weekend in May?
First weekend in May.
Awesome,
3rd,
okay.
4th, and 5th.
Great. Thanks so much.
Oh, and then Fleischmann's Founders Day, Saturday, June 8th. We actually have the Fleischmann's Yeast Company involved. It's going to be a big national exposure thing. There's a new book out about the company.
No, I never connected.
Yeah. We were named for the Fleischmann family who made their money in the yeast business, and they summered in Fleischmann's. And when they left, they sold their property in 1913. They donated what became the ball field to the town. So to thank them for that gift, they renamed it Fleischmann's. It had been in Griffin's Corner. Okay, thanks.
There was some book, and I don't remember where or when.
Smile, you're on candid camera.
Now hit delete. Hit delete.